It's good to see some excellent community networking happening in the public area there. That's great. Okay, now Geoff Barnes. Is Geoff here? Geoff.
Certainly is.
Welcome to the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to water billing for the same reasons that it was withdrawn by the City Council back in 1990 or thereabouts. Firstly, water meters are not accurate for billing. Easy statement, but the facts are there. They should be replaced between 5 and 10 years. Auckland Water Care recommend 15 years. Some of the meters in Christchurch are well over 40 years old. They are not accurate for billing, for rate billing in particular. The cost to replace meters, if you work it out on a cyclic basis, there is tens of millions of dollars to replace the meters to bring them up to standard sufficient to justify invoicing. Secondly, the changes to the rating policy should be introduced as part of a long-term plan, not introduced as a modification. The wording in the long-term plan was vague. To do it now, it's going to affect potentially 120,000 ratepayers. It should be part of a long-term plan process and all options considered. The excess charge, if you do proceed with it, should be the marginal cost of supply, not the average cost. Your infrastructural costs, which are fixed, whether there's a cubic metre of water flowing through the pipes or not, they are recovered by the targeted rate for water. The marginal cost of supply of pumping an extra cubic metre of water, I put a figure on 10 cents a cubic metre, is the electricity costs. That should be the basic, not $1.05, about 10 cents a cubic metre, if you're going to do it according to proper accounting principles. Your staff member, you're the management of the system, in her publicity notes talk about and reducing the council's pumping costs. The pumping costs are not $1, they are far less than that. You've got to do the right thing. The charge is inequitable. Many properties in the city do not have a separate meter, ownership flats, unit title, blocks of flats. You cannot charge those by metered consumption. What do you charge? The first unit? The corporate body? All of those are illegal bases of charging. So you're excluding probably 25% of the residential sector from this charging regime, if you're doing it fairly. It is a rate, it's not an invoice for goods sold under Sale of Goods Act. The costs of billing are high, talking possibly up $400,000. I did the figures, I worked for the council, this was my territory years ago. The figures, when you took into account invoicing, extra metering, substantiating the bill, dealing with the complaints which will come through to you as councillors for the small bills and that people will not understand. One of the files from key ratepayer who was opposed to this was about probably 150 mil high of documentation. Are you going to put a property up for a rating sale on the basis of a charge regime which is illegal, inequitable? The calculation is not clear in your rating resolution as contained in the annual plan. I know, I wrote many of those words that are in those rating resolutions. I know what they mean. It is a vague reference to, for instance, the 698 litres, 0.6 of a cubic metre versus the 0.9 of a cubic metre, which is talked about in your press release. Those figures are not in your draft annual plan. The words do not reflect it. Secondly, the concept of reflecting a per annum allowance is not reflected in there. It talks, the words that are in the draft annual plan rate resolution talk of a daily allowance. Now, I brought that in back in the early 90s for the commercial sector for some specific reasons.
Now, we have come to the end of the 3 minutes already, so if you just wanted to wrap up reasonably quickly.
The most important thing is that this is not the problem. The problem is about increasing the council's consent to extract water. 20 years ago, you had a 30% margin between that which was pumped out of the ground and your consent. Now you're probably down to less than 10%. What are you going to do when it hits that limit of 75 million cubic metres? Where are you going to go after that? Are you going to stop allowing subdivisions to occur? You've taken the money by way of development contributions to provide services to the community. But what's your fallback position? There are alternatives. You can pursue those alternatives. You do not have to choke what is in effect a major recreation pursuit for the city of Christchurch. You can pour millions into professional sport and the facilities they require, and yet you're penalising citizens who want to have a major part of their recreation and well-being in their gardening processes. You could just write to people who have excessive supply, ask them to reduce it. It's not difficult, just drop a letter in their letterbox and say, listen, we note you're exceeding a limit. Would you mind reducing? People will comply, generally. There'll be the odd standouts, but that's it.
So we've got your written submission. Thank you very much indeed for that, and thanks for coming speaking to it this morning. Thank you.